Museum of Zoology. My name is Dean and I work here in the collection, and welcome to the Festival of Culture. Starting Monday and going on till Saturday, we have 80 free events happening here at UCL that celebrates the arts and humanities and social sciences, a vibrant community of researchers and students that practice here at the university. Now, I am going to hand you over in a moment to Meredith Pugh, who is going to tell you a little bit more about the event and tell you a little bit more about the quiz you have. But please join me in welcoming our panel this evening.
Good afternoon and welcome to our event. It's wonderful to see so many people here, and I'm sure you're looking forward to our event of talks and discussion as much as I am. Thank you for the introduction, Dean. I'm Meredith Pugh Davis and I teach German literature and culture and comparative literature and things like that at UCL. And if I were a monstrous creature or a mythical beast, I would probably like to be a siren, that is, an ancient Greek bird woman who can fly around, foretell the future. Both things that I think would come in quite useful at the moment. I'll introduce my colleagues in a minute, but first of all, I just wanted to say a few words to present the event itself. Our idea was human beings have always related to non-humans, animals, real and fantastical, monsters and creatures, in order to try and identify and to define themselves. And so our idea here originally was to explore ways in which people have tried to define what is human by saying what is not human and where are the boundaries between the human and the not human. But of course, as I think we are about to see in the next hour or so, these boundaries are not absolute. They shift, they're porous, they move about in ways which are exciting and also sometimes quite troubling. So some of the questions we'll be asking this afternoon are, what is human? What's animal? And what's monstrous? And we will be asking how these ideas change their shape through the ages. We'll be exploring these questions more specifically through the medium of a grand prize quiz, a series of short talks, and an opportunity for question and answer with you, the audience. I will introduce my colleagues who will be speaking in just a minute, but before that, I just wanted to say a word or two about this quiz, about the setting. About the quiz, now you will have found that, or you'll have been handed that on the way in. One of you will win your very own fantastic beast in this quiz. So make sure you put your name on it. We will be taking these in and marking them. There is also a tiebreaker. I'm assuming you're all going to get full marks on it, so we will need some way of distinguishing. There is a tiebreaker on the back, and it's in honour of the 100th anniversary of Franz Kafka's famous story, The Matamorphosis, which was published 100 years ago last year. And as you probably know, in this story, a man wakes up one morning and finds out that he's been transformed into a thing, a terrible, horrible thing. And the story never actually really lets on what it is. What we do know is that when Kafka's publisher suggested illustrating the story, Kafka reacted very strongly. He said, no, don't let him draw the thing, anything but that. So we don't actually quite know what the thing is. So what I want you to imagine in words or in an image is, what is this man recoiling from as he opens the door? That's your tiebreaker. We'll be taking the quizzes in the course of the event, so, sort of think them over as I'm speaking, and we will take them in maybe after Geraldine or Jane have finished speaking. The questions that you can see are all based on medieval bestiaries, that is, beautifully drawn and inscribed manuscripts from the Middle Ages, which explain and illustrate all the known creatures of the world at the time, plus a few more besides. So on the one hand, these works use the animals as a basis for religious teachings and moral teachings, but on the other, they serve as a fascinating record of what was thought and known about life on Earth in the Middle Ages, and we'll be hearing more about this shortly. The questions that you've got are all taken from these bestiaries and definitions, and I think they're revealing not only about the animals in question, but in ways in which the people who wrote them thought about the world. we're very excited that we're undertaking our exploration into the theme of metamorphosis in this awesome setting and this awesomely appropriate setting, the Grant Museum of Zoology. It is one of the most astonishing places in UCL, and that is saying something given that we also have a dead human body in the hall. The Grant Museum is the only surviving zoological university museum in London, and it houses around 68,000 specimens. And it was founded in 1828 as a teaching collection, and it's still used very avidly today. As you can see, it's a veritable Noah's Ark of all the animals you can imagine, and a few more besides, and also some extinct animals, quagga and the dodo. And I'm very pleased to be introducing some of the cast of the museum. We have our very own lion, a tiger. We have a very tiny wolf, a stork, a newt, a frog, and a human. And you'll be hearing more about all of these in the course of the evening. So we are very pleased to be introducing part of the Grant Museum's collection this evening. I'll now introduce my colleagues, and they will then hand over to one another in sequence, so as not to disrupt the links between the talks. We'll ask you to save any questions or points you want to make until the end, when I hope we'll be in a position to make connections between all the different things we've heard. Now, the first of our speakers today is Geraldine Horan. Geraldine, if she could be an animal, would like to be a poison dart frog, like that one, because it's cute to look at, but also potentially quite dangerous. Geraldine is also head of German at UCL and a senior lecturer in German language. Her research interests include language and gender, as well as dialect and identity, and taboo language. Last year, she gave a TEDx talk on the pleasures and pitfalls of swearing, which you can look up online, but I'm told it's not for the faint-hearted. A bit more about that shortly, I think. Jane Gilbert, next to Geraldine, says she would like to be an albatross, but that she is also in touch with her inner guinea pig. Jane is a specialist in medieval French and English literature on one hand and literary theory on the other, and she's attracted especially by the weirdness of the Middle Ages, but in turn also how it can be related to the weirdness of today. She's going to be telling us about rocks and stones and trees and what happens when people are metamorphosed into even more alien forms than animals. Tim Beasley-Murray is Senior Lecturer in European Thought and Culture in the School of Slavonic and East European Studies. And his work operates on the borders of literature, philosophy and political theory in French, German, Russian and Czech and Slovak in particular. And he's going to be telling us today about some ingenious interpretations of the children's classic by Judith Kerr, which I imagine a lot of you know, The Tiger Who Came to Tea, as we have got an actual tiger here. They wouldn't let us have a live one, but the skull is still pretty cool. Finally, Elizabeth Darnley brings us up to the 21st century. She recently completed a Lever Hume Early Career Fellowship here at UCL in French, researching the travels of fairy tale and different media from manuscripts to the internet. She now teaches at UCL and Cambridge, and her first book appeared last year. She also works as an arts producer, and she's currently bringing walls and statues to life in public art projects. And she says that it would be fun to be an Egyptian sphinx. They're very wise, they're partly lion, they can fly, and they get to ask riddles all day, which seems like a very good introduction. Okay, thank you. Now, over to Geraldine.
Thank you very much, Merarid. As she said, I am interested in swearing, taboo language, so I'd like to talk a little bit about animal insults, as you can see there, and in particular in German. So why is it that when we come to the fundamentals of human communication, when we tell someone how much we love them, how much we hate them, we tend to turn to animals? In fact, we turn other people into animals. So terms of abuse and insults in many languages draw frequently on the animal world, on animal references and imagery. And for centuries, animals have played a role in the way in which we portray our world in different languages, even in a biblical context. So debate has raged over the centuries as to what languages were spoken in the Garden of Eden, and it turns out that language scholars are not just interested in what Adam and Eve spoke. So Adam, well, let's have a guess. What did Adam speak? Any guesses? European languages?
French.
Thank you, yes. Eve? Italian. And the serpent, what did the serpent speak? English. The serpent spoke English. Why? Not only because English was considered a rather suspicious language, particularly in the 17th century, it being a ragtag of different languages, it was also because it sounded lispy. So that's why it was seen as somehow snake-like. So something for us English speakers to bear in mind. But of course, these scholars that tried to associate languages with animals were not really interested in whether the serpent actually did speak English or not, but actually assigning qualities to the language and vice versa. So staying with the link between the language, or with language and the divine, coming to insults. For many centuries as well, language has been associated with the divine and seen as a gift from God. And that means that what comes out of your mouth should not in any way be dirty or filthy or contaminatory. But of course, swearing and insulting often is. That's why we have expressions like wash your mouth out with soap, or we call people potty mouths if they use bad language. And when we insult people, as I said, we tend to draw on a wide range of animal-related insults, and German is no exception, drawing on mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, arthropods, and mollusks. Just to give you a few examples. Oh, there we go. Forgotten about that. If you're not a speaker of German, this may be one of the swear words, the insults that you are familiar with. Schweinehund, combination of a pig and a dog in that case. It is used in German, but possibly not as frequently as non-German speakers would think. So it translates roughly to English as pig, dog. And interestingly, although Schwein, or its similar equivalent Sau, which is another word for pig in German, is a frequent swear word, it's also, pigs are also seen as quite positive. So you can talk about Schwein haben, to have pig, which means to have good luck. So it seems that pigs are reviled and liked in equal value. So turning to other mammals, well, dogs, pigs, as I said, feature prominently and are rich sources of expression. Dogs can be stupid, wretched, dirty, and despicable in German. Goats are associated with moaning, complaining, and generally having an unpleasant behavior. Gewitterziege, for example, which literally translates as a thunderstorm goat, refers to a woman. A sour old hag is a translation that you sometimes see. And of course, these animal insults, as I said, are not new. If we go back to the 16th century German Reformationist Martin Luther and another Reformationist Philipp Melanchthon identified a singular creature in their satirical pamphlet from 1523, and that is the Papstesel, the Pope donkey, or the Pope ass. Rather a lovely combination of various features, not all of which are particularly donkey-like, but was a very effective image. Now, what strikes me in looking at these animal insults, and I've had some quite good fun looking at them, is how much actually German draws on birds for its animal insults. Here are some examples. Birds and alcoholism seem to be, although they're not an obvious link, they are a popular one. What do we have in English by comparison? You can be pissed as a newt, rat-arsed, for example, drunk as a skunk. Well, in German, you tend to be something bird-like. You can be a Trinkstorch, literally a drinking stork, or a Schluckspecht, a guzzling or a slugging woodpecker. Sometimes known as a booze hound, apparently, in American English. Or you can be a Schnapsdrossel, a Schnaps thrush, or a Schnaps Amstel, a Schnaps blackbird. You begin to see a pattern here. The bird is less important than the drink, Schnaps in this case. So moving beyond alcohol, if someone is considered suspicious, or dodgy, they are called ein schräger Vogel, literally a tilted or a wonky bird, which does seem very, very strange. Now, in German, if you are described as, let's see if it comes up without giving me away. Yes, if you are a Bordsteinschwalbe, literally a curbstone swallow, what do you think you are? Any guesses? A prostitute. Interesting. Luckily, there is no play on the word with swallow, but we shall move swiftly on because it's not past the watershed yet. Less interestingly, but rather depressingly, women who are considered to be bad mothers are known as, has anybody come across the expression? Rabenmutter, a raven mother. And rather depressingly, it's often applied to women who have the audacity to work outside of the home and have children as well. Also interestingly, there is no male equivalent. There is no raven father, so it's only the mother who is the bad bird in this case. Now, what these examples point to are, of course, certain gender-related differences between birds and animal insults. Goats, for example, tend to refer to women, whereas men are referred to as lions, a Salonlöwe, a dandy, for example, or a lounge lizard, or they're referred to as newts, a Lustmolch, a lust newt, or a lecher. And of course, this will have an impact on how we then look at gendered behaviour. So why are animal names so popular and effective as terms of abuse, also terms of affection? Now it seems that animal expressions are most important to us when we are at our most passionate and vulnerable, when we're angry and affectionate. And we channel these feelings into expressions that essentially remove the humanity from the target or objects of our anger or affection. Now, linguists have done some research into this, particularly into metaphor, the role of metaphor, and of course that is fundamentally about transformation and translation. And referring to people as animals of some sort requires a certain distillation of their qualities and characteristics, the things that really infuriate us and delight us. And it's also about creating mental shortcuts so that we don't have to enter into large, long, complicated explanations. So recent research into cognitive linguistics, so looking at language and the mind, suggests that this is not just a sort of an expressive flair. This is actually about a cultural repository, but also it's about organising the way in which we perceive the world along shared lines. And some have gone so far to say that actually these animal insults and metaphors generally work because they are a conceptual blending of the social intelligence part of our brain that tries to come to terms with our society and living together, and the zoological domains. They actually form a very clever bridge and bypass a lot of the critical thinking that we have to do. I've explained it in a really poor way, but that sort of gives you the idea. It is a mental shortcut. Now, just to finish off, this may, of course, seem fairly harmless, or it can be very amusing. There are lots of jokes about animal metaphors being taken literally or not. You can do an animal metaphor test to find out how successful you are in your business and private lives. But of course, on another level, when applied more generally to groups of people, then it can become something quite dangerous and sinister. So we have seen many examples, some fairly recently, of how, for example, migrants, how asylum seekers are referred to using metaphors from the animal kingdom. And the problem is, or the question is, if you portray groups of people systematically and repeatedly as animals, as parasites, as pests, or some sort of animal that is not well liked, then is there a danger that you will begin to treat people in such a way? And history tells us that, yes, this is the case, that we do tend to begin to view people in the way that we portray them. in animal terms. So that's a rather somber note to end on. But to sum up, animal insults are vivid, they're effective, they're funny, and most of all, they can be very powerful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've been told not to gesticulate. This is going to be a bit of a challenge. I'm a gesticulator, sorry. I also don't know how to work this. Let's try. Oh, this is the old one, Mererid. This isn't the new one.
Oh, I'm sorry, I hadn't.
This isn't the one that you said. Okay.
Okay.
Let's try that one again. This is a quotation from Charles Thomson, a poet and translator of Ovid. Given the option between tree and stone, you and I would choose to become trees, would you not? Will we not? And I wanted to start with this because I think we're quite good today at sort of animal-human metamorphoses. We're quite sort of fluid with the idea that people can become wolves, that there are manimals of different sorts. But I think we find it much harder to think about what it means to become a tree or what it means to become a stone. But those things, you know, there are a lot of human stone and human tree metamorphoses in literature. So how do we think about those? And what I wanted to do was focus this on a very famous poem, Song 23, in the Rime, sparse by Petrarch, of the 14th century, so either late medieval or early Renaissance, depending on how you look at it, Italian poet. This is one of the great sort of poems in the lyric tradition of Europe, and particularly in the love lyric tradition, of thinking about what it means to be in love and of creating the discourse for what love might mean to us as a deeply serious and very human kind of event and phenomenon. In this poem, in Song 23, it's particularly famous because the poet, and indeed the lady that he's in love with, go through a sort of dazzling series of metamorphoses which overlap and take in Ovid, the great classical metamorphoses, but also sort of inflect those in various much more modern, to him, that is medieval kinds of ways. So, part one of this, if I got it right, okay, is trees. I'm going to ignore some of the slides because they were for a longer version of this talk. Okay. So, trees. Now, at one point in the poem, this is what Petrarch says. These two, that is love and the lady, these two transformed me into what I am, turned me, a man alive, to laurel green that shed no leaf for all the winter's chill. What I became when first awareness dawned of this transfiguration of myself, I saw my locks become that laurel frond that I had hoped indeed would be their crown. The feet I stood and walked and ran upon, as to the spirit every limb responds, I sensed become two roots beside the waves, not of Peneus of a statelier stream, felt arms transmute themselves, become two boughs. So the reference is to Daphne and Apollo, the legend of Daphne and Apollo, and there is Bernini's version. Daphne and Apollo, just to recap, Apollo falls in love with Daphne. She runs away from him. She prays to the gods to rescue her from rape, and they turn her into a laurel tree, as you do. So Daphne escapes rape, but Apollo nevertheless gets to use and possess and enjoy her body because he takes her leaves and makes them into the laurel wreath, which is the crown of the musicians and the poets of whom he is the god. Okay. So it becomes his own symbol. Now, this is a key reference for Petrarch because the lady he is in love with is Laura, the laurel. Okay, so this is very much his thing. She's the laurel tree. And he's also always aware that the love poetry that he's writing for her is going to win him a laurel wreath. I mean, he does become a poet laureate. Okay. This is the prize that we'll award to great poets. So, of course, the poetry that he is writing for her, she's not the only audience for that. It is primarily an audience of other poets and of connoisseurs. And actually, Laura is much more useful as a muse because she is firstly unwilling and then dead. She dies at some point in the course of these poems. And of course, the people who are dead can't answer back. I mean, they are very useful and they're very frustrating. And frustration leads to more love poetry, and often better love poetry. Okay. And certainly more intense. The intensity of a dead lover is very useful for thinking, for writing great poetry. And he really knows that. But in this poem, as I was just quoting, it's not actually the lady who gets turned into the laurel, it's the lover. So what do we do about that? How do we read that? And this is where I want to go away from a sort of classical mainstream with Daphne and Apollo and think about a more medieval tradition. And just Maria had said, I like what's weird about the Middle Ages. So this is highlighted by a critic called Carolyn Dinshaw. And these are green men. You come across these a lot in sculpture, to some extent in art. And the questions that Dinshaw asks about these is, what kind of subjectivity does something like that represent? What kind of being does that represent? Is that a person with a tree inside them, or is it a tree with a person inside them? What kinds of emotions are happening there? What kinds of thoughts? Some of them look quite serene, some of them look furious. Some of them, I think, personally, I find the one down on the right particularly disturbing. Are they animate trees? Are they animate stone? There are a whole series of questions happening there where that is a very, very strange image of what a subjectivity might mean, what a living, experiencing, emoting being might be. So which is dominating here? Is it the human or the plant? What kind of thing are they? So if we think of what Petrarch is doing, of his representation of himself and Laura, the beloved, the laurel tree, as something like this, then I think you get a very vivid picture of what it is that love does to the lover. The poet doesn't get to be Apollo. He doesn't get to be the person who uses and consumes the beloved and her body, sort of the passive and pliable one. He is really torn apart by Laura growing inside him, by this love growing inside him. And I think you have to see something like that. That this really rips him into pieces. The beloved and love get under his skin. They force poetry out of his mouth, force the expression of love out of his mouth. So, and love, of course, means having somebody else growing inside you. It means that you grow with and around somebody else. So it forces you together into this kind of violent juxtaposition, this violent intersubjectivity that is painful and fracturing as well as being creative. And of course it couldn't really be creative and intense and human unless it were also all of these other things. And as he cries out a few lines later on, this is a different translation, but I like this one particularly. I wrote with ink and bitter tears, I am not mine, I am not mine. Behold my life away that wears, and if I die, the loss is thine. So in love, how do I tell what is me and what is you? We have not become one, but we are no longer independent of each other. We grow together as well as separately in a kind of radical symbiotic interconnection that makes questions about self and other and subject and object really sort of redundant. And this brings me to part 2. Okay? Rocks and stones. You can tell I started off with Wordsworth here, but he got cut. All right. So Petrarch is also transformed into stone. This quotation, the girl who with a look rips souls away, unsealed my breast, seized with her hand my heart, instructing me, breathe not a word of this. I saw her next in altered guise, alone, so that mistaking her, oh, human sense, I, fearful, spoke the truth to her instead. At once then she resumed her former face, and made of me, alas, poor wretch, a stone, one half alive, disheartened and dismayed. She spoke with such a troubled countenance, it made me tremble there within that rock, to hear, I am perhaps not whom you think. And to myself I said, if she frees me from stone, no life can sadden or annoy. To make me weep, my Lord, return, I pray. I know not how, but thence I dragged my feet, accusing no one other than myself, suspended between life and death all day. What's interesting, well, one of the interesting things here is that it's not while he's stone that he can't feel anything. He can feel while he's made of stone. It's when he's freed from that condition that he returns to a living death, that he becomes someone who can't feel. And it's in this state that the previous lines about crying bitter tears of ink come in. Now, petrification and liquefaction together, lots of people get turned into stone. Not many people get turned into stone and liquid at the same time. And the famous one is Niobe. Okay. There she is. Niobe, who is a human, mocks the goddess Latona for having only 2 children, with the result that those 2 children, Apollo again and Diana, his sister, massacre Niobe's 14 children. Niobe weeps herself into stone and eventually becomes the mountain, and that is Mount Sipylus, which is supposed to be her. And the stone weeps still, as you can see. So today I think human stone is an oxymoron. We talk about a heart of stone, we talk about getting blood out of a stone. You know, it's a byword for insensibility. But that doesn't seem to be what's going on here. The only way that stone will move these days is if I pick it up and throw it, okay, and it's not going to bleed and it's not going to weep for anything. But in the Middle Ages, again, in pre-modern thinking, stones are not just something that's inert. And this is for instance, they often turn up in bestiaries, stones do, the kind of material that you've got there in front of you. So this is called a myrmecolion. Okay. And it says, there is a stone in the sea, which is called in Latin myrmecolion and in Greek concasabea, because it is both hollow and round. It is moreover divided into 2 parts, so that if it wants to, it can close up. The stone lies at the bottom of the sea and comes to life early in the morning. When it rises from its resting place to the surface of the sea, it opens its mouth and takes in some heavenly dew, and the rays of the sun shine around it. Thus there grows within the stone a most precious shining pearl indeed, conceived from the heavenly dew and given lustre by the rays of the sun. Now, as you've probably worked out, this is an oyster. You know, this is what we would call an oyster. And we would classify it as an animal because it does the kinds of things that we think only animals do, but for them it's a stone, okay, doing these things. Moving, opening a mouth, gestating, all of those are things apparently that stones can do. And I think this kind of image about a stone and the idea of a human becoming stone then sort of challenges to think about aspects of human existence like passivity, receptiveness, responsiveness, and about how those might work in ways that, again, go beyond what you might think of an animal being able to do, or even a tree. And in Petrarch's case, of course, these also relate particularly to love and to poetic creativity. Sorry, that's more of them. There we go. Okay. What it's worth remembering that medieval texts, unlike classical texts and unlike modern texts, are written on animal skins. Parchment is an animal skin. They use birds' quills to write with, that's a pen, and they're written using mineral or vegetable inks, so stones and trees. So European love poetry, at the point when it really starts becoming love poetry, is a kind of displaced tattoo. It's a tattoo that you write on and with surrogate bodies that associate humans not only with beasts and birds, but also with rocks and stones and trees. So the lovers, the poet lovers, the tree lover and the stone lover that Petrarch puts forward are not, I think, so much paradoxes, they're not impossible things, that much as explorations of how love takes us outside what we normally think of as human or even animal responses. What does it mean to be moved by somebody else? To respond with a creation, to respond with a pearl or a poem or love or a laurel wreath, to the call of the other, to the call, the challenge that someone else puts in front of us. When that call is so fundamental that an animal word like visceral really doesn't get to the bottom of it. Thank you. Would you like to?
Great, thank you so much, Jane. So I'm going to take us from the medieval period to the present day. Well, the 1960s, in fact, and to Judith Kerr's picture book of 1968, The Tiger Who Came to Tea. And I want to, despite Judith Kerr's many protestations that the tiger here is simply a tiger and a sort of echo of Freud's supposed words about the cigar, I want us to imagine what this tiger might really be, and imagine with many parents and children who've thought there's something weird going on behind this text. And I want to ask what this animal is doing, this animal at the door. And my premise is essentially this, that the stranger or the animal knocking at the door, we'll see him in a moment, is in fact the animal or the stranger within. That the tiger is being used to get at the strangeness of our unconscious desires and their animal nature. And I'm following here, to a large extent, a rather old-fashioned book, and I know Elizabeth here is an expert on on fairy tale, but Bruno Bettelheim's book on fairy tale, The Uses of Enchantment, where he argues that animals, dangerous animals in fairy tale, often symbolize the untamed id, not yet subjected to ego and superego control in all its dangerous energy. And I apologize, there's one person here who was at my rather, well, it was a select band of listeners yesterday when I gave a rather longer version of this talk. Oh, there are handouts for you if you want them. Okay, so let's very quickly, because we're able to do this, if we were doing, Anna Karenina, this wouldn't be possible, let's read the text, right? So this is the story of Sophie and her mummy who are having tea when there's a ring at the door. And there's Sophie's mummy said, I wonder who that can be. It can't be the milkman. It can't be the boy from the grocer. It can't be Daddy, sorry. We'll better open the door and see. And who is it? It's the tiger, this big, furry, stripy tiger, who's hungry, who wants to come in and have tea. And Sophie's mummy says, of course, come in, right? And so the tiger comes in for tea. They offer the tiger lots of food, and he eats it all. Here he is eating all the buns, the biscuits, drinking all the tea and all the milk. And finally looking around the kitchen in this interesting sort of setting with the little girl Sophie, eats all the supper, everything in the fridge, all the tins in the cupboard, all the milk, the orange juice, even Daddy's beer, all the water in the tap. Okay? And then he goes. It's rather a mess. There's no supper being prepared. No bath is on tonight. And then Daddy comes home. Right? Daddy comes home and they have to explain what's going on, and Daddy has a very good idea. He says, let's go out to a cafe. And here they go to a cafe in this interesting nocturnal scene we'll come back to in a second. And they have sausages and ice cream and chips. And the next morning, Sophie and her mother go to buy a can of tiger food in case the tiger should come to tea again. And here's the final page, but he never did. Okay, so how we understand this? I'm just assuming that some of you here may not be familiar with this. I had to read it every night for 3 or 4 months to my then 6-year-old girl, interestingly, rather not her brother. So I'm going to suggest 3 possible readings, which I think overlay. The first one is essentially a patriarchal reading. In this case, what we're close to is the version of Little Red Riding Hood, and Little Red Riding Hood is, in my mind, the fairy tale that we're talking about here. A version of Little Red Riding Hood that we find in Perrault. And essentially, this version of Little Red Riding Hood, it says that the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood is about strange men and their bestial desires. And it's a simple morality tale that warns young women to beware of men like that. This is made clear in Perrault's moral that he attaches to the end of his version of the story. He says, children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they should do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf. I say wolf, but there are various kinds of wolves. There are also those who are charming, quiet, polite, unassuming, complacent, and sweet, who pursue young women at home and in the streets. And unfortunately, it is these gentle wolves who are the most dangerous ones of all. So what we have here, if we say that this maps on in some way onto Little Red Riding Hood, is the tiger as wolf, who comes in, who's taken into allowed into the house. And here we, by the way, have an interesting fairy tale motif of the threshold, that if you invite the dangerous beast over your threshold, you put yourself into the beast's power. Think, for example, what's the one with the goats and the wolf, and the wolf is knocking at the door, and the goat shouldn't let him in. That would be an example. In which case the tiger here is like a sort of trickster figure who tricks the women to invite him in. But here we would suggest this way that the tiger could represent this sort of rapacious male appetite. Appetite both for food, but food here perhaps stands for sexual appetite. Right, here he is. Oh no, I want to go back. Oh, let me go back. Well, here he is voraciously eating them out of house and home. And what do the women do? Well, they respond in this way. They use food as a strategy, as a way to cope with male desire. They try to channel away his desire by giving him food to eat. It's a sort of substitute for sex, if we want. And the father, when he comes back, it stands in contrast to the tiger as a form of legitimate and sanctioned mode of masculinity. Here he is, terribly serious and so on, who reasserts the patriarchal order. Okay? So that would be reading number 1. Reading number 2 is similar, but in a sense opposite, and it's a sort of feminist reading, and it reads The Tiger Who Came to Tea in terms of dream. Now, you know, animals appear in dreams. There's a very interesting lion dream in Freud. One of the things about this text that gives it this oniric quality is the way in which the emotions that you would expect, the affect that you would expect when a tiger turns up at your door, the fright, in fact is absent. And Freud makes this point in the interpretation of dreams. For in dreams it is common for events to be accompanied by an entirely different affect from that one would expect were those events to occur in waking life. And a few pages later, his example is precisely of a dream of 3 lions, where the lions appear, but the dreamer isn't afraid of them. And it gives this oniric quality, this dreamlike quality, that in fact Sophie and her mother are not frightened. So if this is a dream, then dreams, according to Freud, are wish fulfillments, and the argument would be that the tiger here is the wish fulfillment of women's fantasies. He might, as it were, stand for a desire for animal encounters with other glamorous men, right? And if we go here we have the series of rather prosaic and boring callers who the knock at the door might be, this rather rotund, middle-aged milkman, then this young boy on his bicycle, and even Daddy. Daddy looks a little bit rakish, he's got a smile, he's at an angle, but he's got these proprietorial keys that speak of his sort of place in power, whereas when we find out who it really is, it's this glamorous, furry, stripy tiger with his sort of matinee idol looks and so on, perhaps the fulfillment of anyone's wishes. And the result, when the tiger comes, is that women can break completely out of their roles. Here they are within their roles at tea time, but what it results is this riotous excess of sensuality, of bodily excess, of food, and so on. A sort of carnival overturning of hierarchical norms. Through the tiger and his gargantuan appetite, this ordered occasion can become a riotous celebration. And once again, right, here we have the father returning to reassert order, and we can contrast his seriousness here. Particularly, look how small the mother is. She's beseeching him, and he's sitting almost throne-like in judgment of the women. And here, this is this sanctioned pleasure, this serious pleasure, the triad, the 3 of them together. It's almost like the father's just about to say grace, as opposed to the riotous celebration of tea with the tiger. So this reading would have The Tiger Who Came to Tea as a subversive articulation of female desire that stands in opposition to patriarchal order, and also a story of female solidarity. It's Sophie and her mummy. Yes, they tell Daddy what's going on, but frankly he looks like he doesn't believe it, he doesn't care. This is their secret. This is this sensuous experience that they have shared. And then my final reading, which I think, these readings don't contradict each other. I think they complement each other and are at levels, and this is the deepest, darkest level. This is the reading of The Tiger Who Came to Tea in terms of the Electra complex, or the Oedipus complex. And here the story maps almost directly, not onto the Perrault version, but the Brothers Grimm version of Little Red Riding Hood. And here's what Bettelheim has to say about that. A little red cap, in symbolic form, projects the girl into the dangers of her Oedipal conflicts during puberty, and then saves her from them, so that she will be able to mature conflict-free. The maternal figures of mother and witch have shrunk into insignificance. The male, by contrast, is all-important, split into two opposite forms, the dangerous seducer, who if given into turns into the destroyer of the good grandmother, and the hunter, the responsible, strong and rescuing father figure. And what we see here is indeed the mother being progressively sidelined. So here she is, and this is a matriarchal space, the space of tea time, who's going to be mother, right? She's holding the teapot, the symbol of authority, and gradually she's usurped. Sophie stands up, the daughter comes to the fore, and indeed the tiger takes away the teapot from the mother. The mother is entirely sidelined, and here she's absent. And what we have is the daughter, Sophie, and the tiger in this very sensual sort of dance for two around the house. Here we have this very sensual stroking of she's stroking her cheek against the tiger's tail. This is a revolt of a daughter against the matriarchy of tea time. Through the tiger, Sophie can symbolically play at being mother and exclude her own mother to dally amorously with the dangerous daddy figure. And Bettelheim, about Little Red Riding Hood, makes similar points. We're here referring to Gustave Doré's famous engraving of Little Red Riding Hood in bed with the wolf. He says, the combination of feelings her face and body suggest can best be described as fascination. It is the same fascination which sex and everything surrounding it exercises over the child's mind. So we have here a split of the father into tiger or wolf and huntsman or returning father. Now the role of the huntsman is to bring things back into order. Here we have it from Bettelheim. The hunter of fairy tales is not a figure who kills friendly creatures, but one who dominates, controls and subdues wild and ferocious beasts. And here we see it. The tiger, Daddy doesn't come and kill the tiger, but what he does is he domesticates. And here we have this figure of the tabby cat. With the father's arrival, this dangerous tiger has been transformed into a domestic cat. This electoral reading, I think, provides the uncanny heart of this text, this cocktail of repressed desires and fears that allows us to return in a safe vehicle of a children's story. But, finally, a twist in the tale, if you forgive the pun. Bettelheim's argument is that the function of fairy tale is allow children to explore these dangerous fantasies and so on of Oedipus, but at the end everything should be returned to order. And that's essentially what the long quotation says. The key function of fairy tales are those of resolution of unconscious conflict, of reconciliation with the world of everyday reality. We end up in the end of the quotation with a happy reality, but one devoid of magic. Now, here, what we have at the end of the story is crucially not a world entirely devoid of magic, because we have the tiger food that Sophie and the mother go and buy the next day. What is a tiger food? What is this magical thing that is absurdly large? Look at the way that Sophie can scarcely carry it, but also absurdly small if we think how much the tiger has already eaten. It's this strange, uncanny object. It's a prophylactic charm, it's a threat, it's a source of reassurance, it's the promise of future pleasure, it's transgression and conservation, it's a strange element of magic, closed, waiting to be opened, familiar and secret, tin of worms, ticking bomb, Pandora's box, an uncanny can. So that whatever this last page may say, the words, and it's worth remembering this is a story that is read to children who cannot yet read, it says he never did come back, but nevertheless the implicit promise of Kerr's text is, with its uncanny can, is the repressed will eventually come back, the tiger will come to tea again. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'm going to go back to the Middle Ages, but also come forward right up until the present to talk about two quite different, but also quite similar, semi-human monsters. And I'm going to talk about two things really. One of which is what is it about these monsters that make them such suitable monsters for their particular eras, and the other one is what can we learn about the modern monster that will teach us about the older one. So you have quite a lot of information about that, which I think can be helpful more generally. So the first creature that I'm going to talk about is a tall, skinny man wearing a black suit. He has no face, and this is the internet myth of Slender Man. So Slender Man was created kind of as a joke on an online forum in 2009. We can pinpoint it. We can pinpoint his creation down to the minute. So this is the original post on the forum, Something Awful, where somebody said, wouldn't it be funny if we created some fake paranormal images and leaked them and got people to believe they were the real thing? So this was on 8th of June 2009, and people started to post pictures of various things and scary stories, and then on the 10th of June, so just a little bit later, one user called Victor Surge posted 2 photographs, one of which was the one I just showed you. So you can see right in the background behind the children is like a sort of white shape, and that's Slender Man. And he posted these comments, supposedly captions from photographs that had been found as the sole evidence after a library fire. So this really got people going, and people started to post more things saying, I think I've seen the Slender Man figure too. So they started to play along with the game. Slender Man was given a history. One user said, oh, there are woodcuts dating back to the 16th century featuring Slender Man. So you can see there's this woodcut here that's been doctored so that the skeleton has many more limbs than a skeleton would normally have. And another thing about Slender Man is that he has many arms and legs as well. And they give him a German medieval background as well. They say he was a fairy from the Black Forest. And stories about Slender Man started to be gathered together, often on websites known as creepypasta websites, the term creepypasta coming from copy-paste. So the idea is that these are lots of stories that are copied and pasted, but creepily copied and pasted, and put together on these websites. So people can read them and then add their own. So what we're seeing in Slender Man is this collaborative, conscious creation of a story which everybody kind of knows isn't true, but they play along with anyway. But they create a space in it for people maybe to sort of suspend disbelief, but also get into this nebulous space where it might be true, it might not be true. People are kind of comfortable talking about it in this semi-serious way. And this is what we see, I think, in a lot of stories about these semi-human creatures, including the medieval one that I'm going to tell you about in a little while. So along with the creepypastas, we get some slightly less serious stories about Slender Man. So we have parodies of Slender Man. He's rather nattily dressed cousin Splendor Man. There are also Slender Man reworkings that incorporate other characters. So there's a wonderful story called Slender Pony, where Slender Man meets My Little Pony, and it's kind of fabulous. So I do urge you to read that one as well. But the essence of Slender Man is this semi-human figure kind of lurking on the periphery of what we know, what we consider to be human, what we can understand. So I think Slender Man really functions very similarly to things like the Big Bad Wolf. Thinking about the tiger talk we've just heard, you know, he's the same sort of figure. He lurks around. He might cross a threshold. He might not. So it becomes a very compelling figure. So, obviously Slender Man exists in the forest, but another unknowable, unmappable space that he lives in is the internet. So, this is an example of something that we know, we use every day, but we don't really know what it looks like. One scholar developed what he called the Internet Mapping Project, where he got people to draw what they thought the internet looked like and send it in. So this is one of the examples. You've got the mountain range of YouTube and so on. So, the internet itself can become an unmappable, unknowable forest. And there's, a lot of horror films actually deal with haunted technology. So again, this thing that's something that's new, something we can't quite understand. It's just on the borderline of what we can grasp. So The Ring, the Japanese film, and the American remakes, one well-known version about a haunted videotape. More recently, 2014's Unfriended, which is about a haunted Skype conversation. So again, who's actually there at the other end of the phone call? Do you know who it is? So Slender Man, I think, embodies all these sorts of fears. So now I'm going to jump backwards in time to talk about the second story that I mentioned. So this is a medieval werewolf story called Bisclauer. It's about a husband and wife who are very happily married, except for one thing. The wife was very upset when the husband disappeared for several days at a time every week. And when she asked him where he went, he didn't want to tell her, but eventually he revealed the terrible secret about himself, that he was in fact a werewolf. And she wasn't very happy about this, as you can imagine. So I think one way of thinking about figures like Bisclauer is a Slender Man. So he's a werewolf, he's sort of human, but not quite. We don't quite understand him. And stories about werewolves are very popular at this time period. So it's been described, in fact, as the werewolf renaissance of the 12th century. So many stories about werewolves, and it's fascination into exactly what they were, how we can classify them, how we know if somebody is in fact a werewolf. So wolves in general occupied quite a large space in the medieval imagination. So thinking back to this idea of medieval bestiaries, a lot of things about wolves and the dangers of them and how to avoid them. So I just wanted to show you a few examples of this. So they're very ravenous, they want to eat people, they steal voices as well. It's another thing that wolves do. So apparently if a wolf sees you in the forest before you see it, it will remove your powers of speech. And most deadly of all, harp strings made from their guts will corrupt the entire instrument as well. So don't play any harps near wolves. So we're also told what to do if you meet a wolf, so again how to kind of conquer this unknown creature. So if you see it first before it sees you, then you're fine, you don't lose your voice. And finally, if you do see one, if you take off your clothes and bang rocks together, the wolf will have no power over you and you'll be able to escape. Which, I just love that. I don't know if anybody has ever actually tried that. But anyway, that is the advice that you're given. So, as I said, I think that looking at these two alongside each other really helps us to think about what exactly we're talking about when we talk about these unknowable semi-human creatures. So with Bisclauer, you have a werewolf that lurks on the borders of human settlements. With Slender Man, you have a semi-human creature that lurks at the murkier corners of the internet. In both cases, I think embodying our fears about these unknowable spaces and what they might mean for us. So lastly, I don't have any advice as to how to do a Slender Man, but if you see a wolf, you know what to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to all our speakers. Now, have you had a chance to fill in your quizzes?